Now let's talk about the cap ring for a second. All right. So the first thing we have to decide is how many segments are we going to put into the cap ring. And with this, there's a choice. What you want to make sure is that a seam from the cap ring doesn't end up over one of these spaces. So the number of segments in the cap ring should be evenly divisible into the number of segments you have in here, which in this case is 72. So what we could do, one option is to say, okay, we're going to make a cap ring of 72 segments, which would mean there would be a seam here and a seam here that would span these two, and that would happen in each one. I will mention that with cap ring, you're gluing end grain to end grain, which is not really a strong glue up. End grain to end grain generally is weak. It can snap easily. So you want to get as much strength in this thing as you can. So we could do 72. I'm not going to do 72. We could do 36, which would mean you'd go from here to here, right? So you basically completely span this middle guy and then half on that and half on that. Or we could do 24, right? Where 24 goes into it 3 times. So it would go from here, you span 2, and there. Or what we're going to do is 18, which is going to go from this mark over to here. So there's going to be, for each of the cap rings, there's going to be 3 complete open segments spanned by it, plus a half on either side. We could go to 12, and then that would be 6, which would go from here all the way to here. But I think that's overkill. Plus, you'd have these rather large segments. Wouldn't be bad, but I think 18 is the right number for this. So anyway, I'll come back after I've sanded this down, and then we can go to the other side of the shop, and we could talk about doing the cap ring. Okay, I hope you can see this. I went up to the Larry Morley Art segment calculator, and I entered in the information for the cap ring. So let me just show you something. So the wing height I put in was 0.6 inches. The wing diameter, now the wing diameter right now is 13 inches, which I measured for the bowl. I put in 13.5 because I want to make sure I have a little bit of extra slop. I'll cut off the excess, it's not a problem. I put in a wall thickness of 1.1. It's actually only 0.85, but again, I wanted to make sure that I have enough on the outside and the inside. So I made it a little bit bigger than I need. 18 segments. It tells you the angle, which is 10 degrees on each side, a total of 20 degrees for each of these, which times 18 is 360. And it computed a segment length of 2.42 inches. It also told me that the rip width should be 1.43 inches. And actually the stock, I've dimensioned the stock, it's actually more than that. So we're going to have plenty of overlap. There's going to be a lot of excess stuff. It just turned out that way based on the size of the stock that I have. And then it asks for the cutting method, right? So I'll explain that in a minute. I use economy all the time. And it calculates a board length I need. It says I need almost 42 inches of board to be able to get 18 segments based on these dimensions. I have more than that. It's also just because of the way the stock that I had that lent itself. But here's the difference between economy and the other option in here, which is grain matching. So economy, you go back and forth, and this is the first segment, second segment, third segment, fourth, fifth, sixth. So you get, in this case, you get 6 segments out of this one thing. Now, grain matching, what they try to do is to match the grain as much as possible from segment to segment. So you cut it like this. These segments at the top, these pieces up at the top are just waste. So instead of getting 6, you'd get 4 in this case. Now, grain matching is not perfect because, so this would represent the outside of the circle, but it's really not the outside of the circle because it's a point. So basically the outside of the circle is probably more like in here. And then the inside is going to be something like this. So this distance, you're not going to match the grain, more than likely, unless the grain is perfectly straight. And also here, it's not going to be perfect. So when they say grain matching, it's kind of an attempt at grain matching. Depending on the stock, the type of wood you're using, it's debatable whether it's worth it. Unless you were using something that had a really dramatic grain like zebra wood. But if you're using maple or even walnut, there is a grain pattern in it, but it doesn't grab your eye. It's not distracting. So I always use economy. So anyway, that's what that means. Okay, so now what we're going to do is cut the segments for the cap ring. And so the first thing, we're going to adjust it. We're going to adjust the wedgie sled to the 18 segment wedgie. And again, the way this works, we loosen up the 2 fences. And we try to line the back of the wedgie up with the back of the sled. Now, as it turns out, mathematically, you really don't have to do that. Well, I'm trying to keep, it's a total of 20 degrees for each segment. And I'm trying to keep 10 degrees on each side. But you really don't have to do that. You could actually do, having one side being square and the other side taking the full 20% or 5 and 15. It doesn't really matter as far as getting all these angles joined up. There are actually some effects that you can cause by skewing it, but I won't get into that. But the one thing that will happen if you do that, if it's not square, is it could affect the calculations for the diameter. So anyway, so now this guy now is locked in at 10 degrees, and then all you do is you loosen this up and you come in and snug it up. Now this guy is locked in, so the angle between this and this is off by 20 degrees. Exactly. So let's start cutting the segments, and I'll show you how we do that. Now first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a line on one side of the stock. This stock, by the way, is wider than it is necessary. That's the way it worked out. And I don't care because it's just going to be thicker. We're going to take more waste off. So I'm going to use a marker. I usually use a pencil, but so you can see it, I'm using a thin marker to draw a line down one side. Actually, I need 2 pieces because it's not long enough. So along one side, I'm just drawing a line that I can see later on. And the reason for that is that the the saw relative to the table might not be exactly 90 degrees. It could be 89.92, or it could be slightly off, and it probably is slightly off. So we don't want that whatever that deviation from exactly 90 degrees is, we don't want it multiplied by 18, because that can cause us a problem. So what we're going to do is alternate. We're going to be cutting this way, and we're always cutting with the line on top, and I'll show you how that manifests itself. All right, so first we're going to take off this edge to clean it up. And we put on the dust collection. Now I'm leaving the blade guard off mainly so you can see what's going on here. But so let's clean up this first edge. By the way, before we go further, I just wanted to point out, which I don't think I showed the last time we used the wedgie sled, is this is put on one of these zero clearance inserts, so that, because we're adding a ½ an inch here, the sled itself is a ½ inch thick. We don't want the wood to be unsupported underneath it. That's why we need this little slope thing. Anyway, I have to set up. So according to the sheet over there, the segment length is 2.42. So let me set that on my caliper. So 2.42. It's almost the capacity of this stop. And we're going to lock this down. So that's my stop. So I cut it on this angle. Now I'm just going back and forth like we did before. We're going to arrange them, and every other one, we're going to put the line down. So line up, line down. And by doing that, we eliminate, or we compensate for any possible deviance from 90 degrees from the saw blade. Okay, I'm going to get a band clamp in a minute and clamp these together. But let me just make sure the count's right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Okay, that's 18. Oh, one other thing I'm going to do at this point is, where is that marker? Here it is. What I'm going to do is I'm going to number the seams. I tend to number the seams so that we always put them back, because the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put a clamp on here, and we're going to make sure everything is tight. We're going to hold it up to the light, see if there's any gaps, and we can touch up do minor touch-ups on a disc sander. But anyway, so I'm going to start numbering these. This is a seam 1. I put on both. Seam 2. Seam 3. Now, some people just number you could also just number the blocks themselves as opposed to the seams. I like doing it this way because it just it eliminates any ambiguity as to what goes next to what. All right, I'm going to come back. I have to go get the band clamps, set that all up, and then I'll come back. Okay, well I finally got all these seams all tightened up. If you hold it up to the light and look through now on both sides, you can't see any light through the seams. So I had to go over to the disc sander and take off, adjust quite a bit. It's a process. Sometimes it happens where you'll put a ring together and there's no adjustments have to be made, but a lot of times there is. So now what I'm going to do, now that I have it adjusted properly, is I'm going to open this up. And I'm going to take some masking tape. And I'm going to take number 1. Well, actually, if I want to show you, I'll turn it around this way so you can see. And I'm going to line the first one up along the edge of the tape. And take the next one, number 2, and touch the point and bring it down. And walk all the way around. Now what I'm going to do is cut off the excess tape so we don't have this tape laying around. I'll put some wax paper down. Okay, for this glue up, we're going to use Titebond 3. Highly recommend you use this and not Titebond 2 or Titebond 1. This is waterproof. Titebond 2, they say, is water repellent, but this is definitely worth going. It's the green container, and it says Titebond 3 or Ultimate. Okay, let's do this. So we're going to lift this up from both ends. Meet in the middle. And attach them. And lay it down. Now, it's quite messy. You're going to get some squeeze out on this. Put the band clamp back on here. I'm going to snug it up a little bit. Not really tight. I'm going to push down to make sure that all these guys are in the same plane. And so I built this segment press from plans that I got up on a blog up on Woodcraft, the Woodcraft blog site. Anyway, I'll see if I can find the link to it. It's some explanation and a video on how to make this thing. When I made mine, though, just to let you know, I made it a little bit bigger than what they call for. They call for 14 inches between here. I made it 16. So I have a little more capacity. But this thing is pretty cool. This puts a fair amount of downward pressure. Now I'm going to put a little bit of pressure down on this thing, and then I'm going to sock up the band clamp. So not too much. And then I'm going to sock it all the way up. Now, if you were doing multiple rings on a solid segmented bowl, you don't have to leave this thing in here overnight, but seeing as how I don't need it for anything else, I am going to leave it here. So we'll come back tomorrow. That glue up should be done, and then I'm going to show you how we can, sand this down to make it ready for glue up. Okay, see you tomorrow. Okay, we're back. So the glue up is done on the cap ring, and now we have to sand both sides of it so we can glue it up to the bowl. I am going to be using a drum sander to accomplish this. I realize that not everyone has a drum sander. If you don't have a drum sander, a couple things. First of all, do not even consider putting this thing through a planer. If you have a planer, don't do it. There's a tremendous amount of downward force that the infeed and outfeed rollers exert on the piece, and remember, these joints are end grain. They're not inherently strong. So if you had a little bit of if one of these pieces was slightly raised over the other and you encountered it, it's possible that the rollers could snap the joint. I've never tried it, but I don't intend to. But even if the piece held together, it wouldn't work well, because what ends up happening on a planer, your cutter heads are turning against the direction of the feed of the piece. So on the tail end, you're going to encounter a piece. One of these pieces is going to be cross grain. So you're going to get with a planer, you get terrible tear out, rip out with when you try to go cross grain. Generally, when you're feeding in a planer, you have to feed in the direction of the grain. So you can't do that with this because it's circular. So if you don't have a drum sander, you can make a jig like this. And basically, I think I used a piece of wood that was used for like shelving. Put a faceplate on it, and you can draw as many concentric lines on the lathe as you like, so you can center your piece, and then you can attach the piece to that guy with either double-sided duct tape, or this is what they call woodworking tape. It's generally for CNC use, where you secure a piece on a CNC bed before you cut it. But so you can use this as well, or any double-sided tape that's strong enough. And then you would do both sides, right? So do one side, turn around to the other side, and if you're doing that and you also don't have a segment press, which most people don't have also, unless you build one, you can leave it on there, the second side after you sand it, and you can use that to glue the two pieces together, to glue this to the bowl. Okay, so let's start this puppy up, start the dust collector. Okay, so it's already raised high enough so that it's slipping under here. So what I'm going to do is turn it on, set a very slow speed, and then slowly bring the head down until it contacts. I'm going to take very light passes. Okay, so there it is, nice and smooth both sides. Now we're going to glue it to the bowl. Okay, so just about ready to do the glue up. I'm going to use a glue I haven't used before. I normally use Titebond 3 for this, but there's Titebond has a glue called translucent wood glue, and it's supposed to help any squeeze out not be as obvious. We'll see. You're going to get some squeeze out here. There's hardly any way to avoid it. All right. Oh, by the way, I've also marked, I put the bowl on here, centered it as best I could, and I made a series of marks that I've numbered so that I can get the bowl back in the same exact spot that I had aligned it. So, let's try this out. You don't have to worry about putting any glue outside that circle that was drawn, because that's the edge of the bowl. Now, I mentioned before that there's a way of eliminating that little frictionless issue when you're gluing up a couple of flat pieces of wood, and I found this product. I was at a wood turning show, and it's called Glue Grit, and it's just a grit that you kind of sprinkle on there, and it provides enough friction so that everything's not sliding around on you. I've also seen people use table salt for the same thing. They just sprinkle a little bit of table salt on the glue, and that you don't have to do much. So this is number 3. So you want to make sure that the seam between these cap ring segments doesn't end up in a gap between two of the bowl segments. So that's why I did that thing with marking it, so I can get it right back in the same spot that it was. Okay. All right. So that looks reasonable. And now we're just going to clamp it down. Again, if I can find the link where the video was to build this segment press, I will add it. Clean up whatever squeeze in the openings, the gaps between the open segments. Okay, so I think that's all we can do right now. We'll wait until this thing, I'll probably leave it overnight, come back tomorrow, and we can put it on the lathe. Okay, I'm back ready to turn the bowl. The first thing I'm going to do is put in a jam chuck to give this extra strength. It's sticking out pretty far. It's a pretty big bowl. I'm not too worried about this seam. The weakest part, I think, are the screws through the faceplate. Although I have 8 of them, it's probably not a problem, but can't hurt to be safe. Okay. Put my mask on. And let's start this puppy. Fuck. Okay, so I had a catastrophic failure where the base of this snapped off when I was trying to clean up the cap ring. I made a couple of mistakes. This is the biggest bowl I've done so far. So it's 13 inches diameter and it's pretty deep. And I think I made the base too small for that. And there was too much overhang here. So what I've done to correct that is I made a new base, but much bigger than the other base. So the original base was 5 inches in diameter. This one is a little over 6 inches in diameter. That's 6 3/8 inches. Technically, I only had to redo 2 of the rings because those are the ones that were damaged on here, the first 2 rings. But I ended up doing 7 so that I could do this transition from the from this flat bottom surface into the curve of the bowl while it wasn't very deep. So what my plan is right now is this is done. I've sanded this top ring flat, and what I'm about to do now is to cut off the bottom 7 rings right down the middle of the 7th ring so that I can glue this on later on. So what I'm going to do is put some double-sided tape on here. Let's see, double-sided tape onto this jig that I made, and put it up there to give it some support while I turn it, because right now I have it on cold jaws, and that's not very strong to do that kind of a cut. So let me get some double-sided tape. Okay, so I put some double-sided tape on this, and we'll move it up. Now this is not a normal chuck. It's alive, so it spins, so that I can use it like this. So I'm going to first make a cut with a cutoff tool to get me a slot in there, and then I'm going to use a pull saw to get the rest of it. All right, let's try this puppy out. All right, turn the speed way down with the pull saw. Okay, so I was able to cut it off without damaging the 8th ring. So what I'm going to do now is just sand this off, this last little bit of a ring. I'm going to sand it off to get down to the 8th ring, and then I can glue the new base on.